Well, we are calling once again on Scott Walter, who is traveling the world, and unfortunately, his day job of being a YouTube contributor is getting in the way of his vacation, or vice versa. I'm not sure which. Scott, are you having a good time over there? Are you getting any skiing in?
Having a great time. The skiing was done. That was like a week ago, and now taking care of a few other things, and then we'll be back home with a proper studio in about 7 days' time.
I don't think it really matters, Scott. All we care about is your brain. So that's all we're interested in. Well, over the last 3 or 4 days, Herbert has been at it strong, strong, strong. He has been doing some great interviews, and he's been talking to folks about Optimus, which of course is the number one subject on your mind and my mind. And the interview in particular yesterday with Brett Adcock over at Figure Robotics. That was really, really good. The one with Chris Camillo the other day, I wasn't quite as impressed with that one, even though the guy obviously has done a lot of homework and has some interesting breadth of knowledge based on being actually in a number of the facilities that are in the process of putting together these robots. But yesterday's with Brett Adcock was another, huge, I think, increase in our overall knowledge. What did you think about the two interviews in general?
Okay, I think they're pretty interesting, and actually, the first one that Herbert did with Chris got a little bit of reaction from Cern Basher, because Cern Basher's been trying to model the humanoid bot market to understand it a lot better. And I think he had some pretty good comments in saying that basically directionally they're kind of aligned. They're just making slightly different assumptions. And part of the problem with the models that CERN has been putting together, and then I've been collaborating with CERN on that, is trying to understand, how big the market is and how serious the market is. So let's dial it back a week ago. A week ago, no one was really looking at the humanoid robot market very seriously, at least from those who were like the Wall Street analysts. And we could see multiple companies were not including it in their valuation models. So you got Adam Jonas, who was leaving it out, but throwing in Robotaxi and throwing in Dojo as a service and everything else, but Optimus wasn't in there. ARC isn't even including it in there yet. I mean, they're looking at it, but they still don't think it's part of the Tesla valuation. Gary Black is completely dismissive of the whole thing, is not going in there. And so there's been that back and forth. And part of it is because no one's taken that marketplace very seriously, and we don't really know what the demand is. So CERN has had concern over the fact that he sees the market potential being so big, and wondering, are the CEOs of these top companies even considering it? Because if they're not, they're going to be caught flat-footed, and they better do something about it. So a week ago, we didn't know much about that. And then the announcement comes out of Figure teaming up with BMW. And suddenly the stigma has been lifted a little bit, that everyone is like, okay, but that's just one other company. That's just BMW. And it's just a press release. And it's just BMW and Figure wanted to poke an eye in Tesla, poke a finger in the eye of Tesla. That's all it's about, right? But with this interview that Herbert and I did with Brett, we got a kind of behind the scenes glimpse of how that whole thing came together. And what really shocked me, and of course I was there to really talk to Brett about some of the technical things, because I'm really interested in the bot. But the main thing was, like, when I was listening, I was like, oh, CERN's going to love this. And he's going to like it because it finally starts to give us the data points we've been missing. And that is, are the CEOs of the top Fortune 500 companies, or top, in this case, top 100, are they even looking at the bot? Is it on the radar? And the answer is
yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
Definitely. And to the point that Figure was able to choose who they wanted to partner with.
Right.
In the automotive space, every automotive OEM came to them, and they get to choose the pick of the litter. And they decided the pick of the litter was BMW, because they felt the team had the best, maybe the factory was set up, that they were more serious. And this was discussions over 6 months. So, I mean, they really were thinking about the plan going ahead in that. They will be announcing another company that's not in the automotive space. And then Figure has done what any really mature organization does. startup does. They know when to say no. It's always a problem when you're a startup. You say yes to everyone and everything because you're so desperate for business.
Right.
And what that does is it stretches you out so much that you fail because of it, because you're chasing too many opportunities. You have to stay focused. And so they realize that, look, we can't do all of it. As hard as it is to say no to every major automotive OEM. And it may have not been them initiating the discussions, trying to get into the C-suite and trying to get that contact and going through LinkedIn profiles and doing whatever you can to get into it. It seems like it was the other way around. They're coming to them. So to me, that validates the whole thing. And that means the Wall Street analysts next week have got to reevaluate their models. Not just about Tesla, but also about the top companies. They should be asking themselves tomorrow, if I was a Wall Street analyst, this is what I would be doing. I'd say, Brett said he's talked to the 50 CEOs of the top 100 Fortune companies. Okay, which 50 did he talk to?
Yeah.
I would go through and say, because not all of them in there, there's going to be like some insurance companies and some financial companies, a few others like, oh, they're not humanoid bots. Which ones are the manufacturers? Which ones are retail? Which one have labor issues? Because he brought it up again and again, a point that CERN has been making, that I've seen, I think you've talked about, the problems with labor.
Yeah.
There's not enough. You can't get it. It's so difficult. And so they are having labor shortages. The robots are not taking jobs away, these initially, because the jobs can't get filled in the first place. So, all these data points kind of get confirmed. And that's what was really interesting, is the actual financial discussions that was going on between Herbert and Brett on that, as well as, of course, I loved a lot of the insight. I couldn't get as much insight as I would like, because, there's some things that, he really cannot disclose at this point, and that's fair.
Yeah, so a couple of things that I thought about in the same vein was, number one, from day one, even back in the book, the Elon Musk mission, what I talked about was manufacturing and distribution, that's where the initial bots would go. They wouldn't go in nursing homes. They wouldn't go in personal homes. They wouldn't go. Those were the two spots where they would be the most needed, not only because of skills, but dangerous, repetitious, boring. That's where the dangerous, repetitious jobs are, the ones that are boring. I've worked in that environment. You've worked in that environment. You and I've discussed this so many times that it looked to you and me like there was a lot of low-hanging fruit. And then you even said, not so low-hanging. So it's even, the robot seems to be capable of even doing more than we thought. So having this the reality that he stated over a week ago, Brett said over a week ago that he already had people with their headsets, with their cameras in factory settings, making these recordings and getting prepared for the training. It just told me that unless we're crazy, you and I both, Tesla's doing the same thing. Now, it may all be in their factory, but I just have to believe that Tesla's not limiting themselves to that. They're at least in their tier 1, tier 2 suppliers' factories. And I think maybe they're even in a few factories outside of their realm. Again, maybe in distribution centers, maybe in fast food, maybe in some of these other categories that will be dramatically impacted by a humanoid bot. What do you think? Do you think what we can't know, but do you think they might be going outside their own realm?
Yes, I would think that they're going to be starting, because one of the things that Brett kind of pointed out, which is, I think, true for all of them, is that they're realizing they can't just do everything in a laboratory environment. It's nice to be able to show these nice little demos and stuff like that, but you really got to go out in the real world, the real factory, which is why they had to team up with BMW. Tesla obviously didn't have to, because they already have that problem. They already have that space. They can already do it. And the other thing is that until this interview, we had no idea how many companies were looking at the humanoid bot, which means they all are very good at keeping their lips sealed. No one's talking. So it could be that a lot more is going on out there that we're hearing, again, because of the stigma that's associated with it, maybe really good NDAs. The other thing about this BMW announcement. It seems like it's very mature to me at this point. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, we just decided we're going to go into it, but the fact that they've been talking for 6 months and already exchanging cat data, like it's pretty mature. They've already got along pretty far. They've already identified the processes. They know which ones they want to do. They're starting to go in there. And again, that was all done without anyone even getting wind of it.
Right.
So it seems like people are tight-lipped.
Yeah. So it seems, so on the one hand, I think we can say that to your point, we have confirmation that major corporations, major companies, and maybe some not so major corporations are already contacting people like Figure Robotics, but maybe Tesla also.
You know what I guarantee is going to happen?
Yeah.
Is, again, it's coming back to Wall Street and evaluation models. And that probably the only earnings call where the bot comes up is on a Tesla earnings call. And you will actually get not just a retail investor, but you'll get someone out there that will ask something like Pierre Ferragu will ask usually a good question. But you don't get it on the GM call. You don't get it on the Ford earnings call. I guarantee you will now.
Yeah.
They're going to ask you,
what are you doing about
say,
robotics? Yeah.
What are you doing? Because we understand all the automotive, what's your plan? Since you aren't working with Figure, who are you thinking of partnering with? Or, do you have a partner? Are you talking to specific partners? That's the question I would ask with Wall Street, because remember, it's no longer about Tesla. And unfortunately for Wall Street right now, there are no companies to invest into that are making the bot except for Tesla.
Yeah.
Figure is a private, they're not on the stock market. Sanctuary, a bunch of others. I don't think they can invest in it. So they have to look at it from the flip side. They have to say which companies are moving in that direction, because that is going to affect the business case for them. We need to know that they're forward leaning. Right. We need to know that they are coming up with a partner, that they're not going to suddenly be the one, in the musical chairs that is sitting around with no place to sit. So again, I am expecting that in the earnings calls, they better start asking that question. Yeah.
So once again, to summarize the first part of the conversation, we have this confirmation that there is I mean, Brett said it, Chris said it, they both said it, unlimited TAM. This is going to be the biggest business that has ever existed on Earth. There's no doubt, there's never been a doubt in my mind about this. I don't think there's ever been a doubt in your mind since you first saw it, that this is, and Elon has said it out loud, that he thinks the market is 16 billion units, 2 for every human on Earth. So in terms of a TAM, in terms of competition, doesn't even matter. And everybody kind of said that same thing. For the first 10 years, competition is not going to matter because nobody will be able to make enough to fill in the market. But having said all of that, let's get into some of the technical stuff, some of the things that you and I have talked about, and see if we can start to get closer to the truth. Speculation, of course, but the truth as best as we can get it. I'd like to start with the cost of the bot. So Chris kept talking about a $40,000, a $50,000 bot. You and I, you famously have come up with 2 different methods of looking at it. I think Larry Goldberg came up with another method of looking at it. I am kind of in the middle of all you guys and connecting dots, and I came up with my numbers. But you and I have talked about as low as 6,000, but 10,000 maybe being a kind of a nice, juicy number. After listening, and I know he didn't tell you how much his actuators were costing him, but now we know that at least he has 61 actuators. Was that the number?
No, it's the structural actuators, I think, is 31. So it's Baskin Robbins, and then you have the hands. So I think 43 total.
43 total. Okay.
So 43 actuators total, and they aren't able to come up with a cost model, but he did say that the actuators are the biggest cost, which pretty much from our bill of materials, we've assumed that all along. It's probably more than 50% of the overall cost of the bot. The other thing that, again, if you look at CERN's reaction post, sorry, to Chris Camello's Herbert interview, where he kind of went through and said that what we need to do is like debate the discussions, have a civil debate. So, so CERN kind of lined up where his differences are, but in the end, you get kind of similar results, and that everything is, let's say, we're in this right order of magnitude. So him coming up with 40,000, CERN disagrees with that, says it should be like 10,000, which is about what we have. But the thing is, it's not an order of magnitude off.
Yeah.
If he said 400,000, I would say, oh, you're way off. Or if he said $400, it's like, you're nuts.
Yeah.
But it turns out whether it's 10,000 or 40,000, it almost doesn't impact the model very much because it's a very small difference.
Right. Right.
And so we can quibble over that. I mean, that's just kind of quibbling. And, you know, one of the points is like 40 seems kind of high because you could build a car for less than that.
Right.
So the feeling is it should be less. I think Unitree is selling their bot, but it doesn't have hands or anything like that. It's the one that's able to walk and all. I think they're selling it for about $90,000. So they've already put it on the market.
Right.
So we know that it's possible to come up with something in that ballpark for about $100,000. So you should be able to scale down a lot more as you start getting units and if you know what's going. I'm sure they're looking at at first, the bot's going to be excess for $100,000. I mean, even for Tesla in some ways, depending upon how they start putting it up, those first couple ones are going to cost in that order. But once you scale, it goes down, you know, and once you get those pilots. So it's not going to be $1 million. It's not going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's going to be somewhere between 10 and 100. And I'm more comfortable with saying eventually it will get down to 10. And it will probably go below 10. Mm-hmm. Just because like when I worked at it, I had a really hard time getting up beyond $7,000.
Right, I know.
What do I got to do to push this thing up here? What are my assumptions that are wrong? And the main thing just comes down to the actuators. Is that, you know, I'm confident that once they spool up the line, you could do the actuators for less than $1,000 a piece. Okay, so if you got 42, that's already, you know, there you're talking about $40,000, something like that. If it's around $1,000, I'm pretty sure they should be able to do them for at least 500, and it might vary depending on the size of your actuators. So already you cut the price right there to 2,000, and I'm feeling that eventually they should be able to manufacture them for probably a cost of close to $100 an actuator.
Right, exactly. Yeah, which is kind of where
okay. What's the next big expense?
The software, the chip.
The chip, but the chip is $1,000.
Yeah. Okay. And then
maybe less. And then maybe less because there's only one chip.
Right.
You got a lot of the other electronics in
batteries.
There. The batteries less than $1,000.
Right.
The batteries are going to be maybe 500. I mean, I think I worked it out that I can buy the amount of batteries that they need for $800 on Amazon.
Yeah.
That's me buying it. Okay. I'm sure Tesla can get it for a fraction of that cost because they make that themselves. And then, you know, you look at cameras and all that stuff. It's really hard to get the bomb, but it comes down to the actuators. If my assumption that you can't get the actuators to $100, then you can't do it for under 10.
Right.
You know, and if it's more like 1,000, then Chris is right. It's more like a 40,000, but still 10,000, 40,000. That's peanuts compared to the value that it's able to do.
Right. Yeah. So Chris came to his, hourly rate times number of hours worked times whatever in a very different way than I did, and I don't remember what you came up to.
And that's good.
Yeah.
But it came out about everyone is coming. Yes,
$60,000 a year, $70,000 a year rent. Yeah.
And remember, he did it in a vacuum. He did it without us, you know, poisoning the well, so to speak, of working on his own model, and he comes up with kind of the same thing.
Right.
And I think that's very good for a lot of people to go through with their own assumptions, which is why I've really enjoyed working with CERN, because, you know, he's much better at those kind of numbers than me. And I was able to kind of back the envelope and say, this is what I approximately think it is, but I need someone to really be able to prove the case. And then he was able to go out, use his own assumptions, is able to point out maybe where I missed something or whatever's a little bit wrong. But in the end, we are seeing that the numbers just get crazy.
Yeah. And I put up a video last week, Scott. I don't remember whether you and I talked about it or not, where most people's assumptions right now are you take the labor cost and you add on 35%, let's say, for Social Security and pensions and vacations and all that. But Chris, for the first time, mentioned a couple of the items that I brought up in my video where I think you can double that number in terms of the actual savings when you start talking about no more theft, no differentiation between a fast worker and a slow worker. No more problems with a slow worker and a fast worker on the same line, where you have problems with making sure that the line moves at the pace you need it to move. You no longer have as much supervisory effort taking place. You don't have the hire, the fire, the training. As people are moving in and out of these jobs, every couple of years now, you've got this hire, fire, training cost. You've got the huge HR overhead. The state of California, or whatever nasty state you're in today, I only use California because it's so bad in terms of the overhead that all the regulations about labor put on a company. So I think it's fair to say that it's probably about double the savings of the actual labor plus normal overhead.
Yes, yes, it could be crazy. I mean, it depends on how you do the normal overhead. A lot of people say the normal overhead is like, the FICA and the taxes, but then you do a little bit more because the overhead, like you say, has to include HR. And has to include recruiting. It has to include parking spaces,
Right.
break rooms, bathrooms. I mean, like there's a lot of things, and suddenly that all goes away.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, worker productivity, sick days, all this other stuff, you don't have to worry about that anymore. And the way CERN looks at it is that a robot in the end will be worth about 3.5 workers, because the robot can work like 3 shifts,
Oh,
including weekends.
well, that
So
would be 4
from
shifts,
that,
but that would be 4 shifts.
well, that'd be kind of 4 shifts, but there'll be a little bit of downtime for the robot. So he's kind of looking at that and saying that the ratio he's coming up with is about 3.5 to 1. So if you get 3,500 workers, you only need 1,000 bots.
Right. Okay. All right, good. And then in terms of the per hour, though, that's where I was going, is these other additional
Yes.
overheads
Yes,
add to the
and
per hour
what the
savings.
hourly is going to be,
Right.
and again, it's like I'm not going to quibble with
Right.
Chris's numbers that much. If he says I think it's like 16.67 a dollar, and I think CERN might have been like 15 or 14, or in some cases, even less than what it's going to be.
Right.
It's not hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
We're talking the same order of magnitude.
And it matters not at all, but I was so I I shouldn't be laughing about it, but it seemed to me that he had this complex method of how to charge for the bot. And I'm thinking, in the early days, you just say it's $60,000 a year. Take it or leave it. You don't need any fancy per hour rates, and if it can do more or less, it's just make it simple. I think that's how Elon will do it, is make it simple. It's
Yeah,
60,000 a
yeah.
year. Take it or leave it.
I mean, me think about. I was thinking about it with, like, with ski tickets, or you remember you're down in Disneyland.
Yeah,
Remember
yeah.
how Disneyland, you know what the e-ticket ride is, right?
Yes, I do.
No one knows what the e-ticket ride means,
Right,
because you had to be an old timer. Because it
right,
used to be when you went to Disney, there wasn't really a park entrance fee, or maybe there's a park entrance fee, but you bought a bunch of these tickets,
right. Mhm.
and you use that to do your rides.
Right,
And then eventually they went to like one price for everyone.
right,
So whether you wanted to do one ride that day, or whether you wanted to do 100 rides that day, it cost you the same thing. Whereas
right.
in the old days, you said, well, how many rides do you want to do today? And you would buy 10 stamps. And then, of course,
Right.
the e-ticket was the ticket that was for the best of all the
That's right.
rides. Yeah, the A tickets were for like the teacups or something like that.
Yeah, so we have this kind of the 3 main things, you might say, from a financial standpoint. We got the TAM, we've got the cost, we've got the potential sell, creating massive margins. You can throw in, there might be some cost of management of that product when it's in the field, whether it's repair, if it's a lease, and the lease includes repairs and upgrades, and coming in from time to time and checking in and saying how things going. But whatever that number is, it's still going to be this much compared to the profits. So the profits are pretty crazy. And everybody's gone through those numbers 100 times, and it turns into trillions of dollars very rapidly. So then what that leaves me with is the conversation about when. And it seems like Chris had the furthest out date I've heard of anybody. And I give him some credit for having been in several different boardrooms or meeting rooms with companies that are in the process of trying to make this happen. So I give him a lot of credit on this subject for that. So he's saying conservatively 2027. Then you get to Brett Adcock. It sounded to me like he was saying 2026, that he could get everything kind of figured out this year, and that next year he'd be figuring out manufacturing and starting to get it ramped. And by 2026, he'd be able to make hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever it is that he ramps for. I look at Tesla, and he and several people have said this. I don't know if Brett Adcock has ever said this, but certainly Chris did. Tesla already has it end to end. They've got the software, they've got the hardware, they got the data, they got the compute, they've got the manufacturing capability better than maybe anybody in the world at this point. They've got the facilities, and they've got a massive engineering team where they can borrow, even with, not even within their own company, they can borrow from SpaceX or from Neuralink. So given all of that, did any of and all of this give you a new sense of a timeline in terms of Brett's statement that you and I have made and others have made? You need 1,000 to collect the data and to be in training. When that 1,000 might be in the game at Tesla, and then when the line might be finished with a final, with a ready to go beginning of production. And will that all take place in 2024, like I believe it will, or are we looking at 25 or 26?
Well, I think it would come pretty soon. Because Brett did talk about what I've always said is you can do so much in simulation, but the real world is a lot messier. Real world physics is just different.
Yeah.
And so you need to have enough bots to be able to train on that. And, he had the feeling that it was probably, more than 100, maybe around 1,000. That was sort of the impression I got, which is sort of the guesstimates we've had. But again, when, asking about the actuators is that he says, they can build an actuator in a couple of hours. Okay. An actuator, but you need 43 of them.
Right.
So, that means if you've got a 40-hour week, maybe half of them, if it's a couple hours too, or you're doing different shifts. So, what that means is that they could roughly hand build maybe a couple of bots a month. Maybe if they're lucky and they get it going right now, kind of, one a week. And that was about where Tesla was as well, because they had to build the actuators. It's probably taking about that long. And it depends upon how you parallel process it, whether you set up a couple of different sites here. So, internally and have enough people that are capable of doing that, you can hand crank them out, but still you're talking about small numbers. If you've already got a pilot line, and we suspect they probably have a pilot line for the new one, they should be able to ramp that up a lot quicker.
Right.
And then maybe get to that 1,000 threshold when they're ready to do it. So I would think that by the end of the year, I'm expecting that by midsummer, we should see something like a room full of bots, which is at least 100 in there, or something like that's going ahead and going to work. And you're seeing lots of training data. I suppose the other point I think is that, again, because the stigma has been broken right now, all these companies that were not wanting to talk about it, maybe still don't want to talk about it because they think there's some competitive edge or they don't want anyone knowing it, are going to realize they've got no choice. Because even if it's not going to be asked in an earnings call, a lot of people are going to be wanting to know, well, what is your plan? Do you have a plan for that?
Right.
And they're going to be making some sort of announcements, but it has to be a real announcement. It can't just be, oh yeah, we're planning on doing it, and show some great videos of all these things, and it's absolutely nothing. It's like, well, who's your partner? Who you're partnering with? So you're going to start to see something, or at least some leaks of things like this coming out more and more over, I'm sure, the coming months, if not sooner than that, to find out that what is their strategy.
Yeah, so he mentioned that he felt hardware and manufacturing was going to be his problem. It seems to me hardware and manufacturing will be the easiest part for Tesla. Even after his statements, I think hardware and manufacturing should be the slam dunk. Getting the product to the point where it's ready to produce in mass volume should be relatively easier for Tesla than anybody else probably in the world.
Yes, it should be.
So then that leaves the software or the training. It's not even the software really. It's really the training. It was interesting that he appears to have, even without saying it out loud, it sounds to me like he's going 100% into some kind of visual training, whether that's a video or whether that's watching and somebody actually doing the work we know that he's already got the 360 cameras in these plants where he's getting that data. And then he's also obviously seemed to be indicating real life, having the bot actually watch somebody in real life. So did you get the impression that maybe simulation and hooking people up with wires and stuff is kind of, he's done with that, and it's much easier, much faster to do it using the video data in?
That's what it seems like. So he's very confident with the way they're able to train the bot. And there's like little clues on how they're doing it, but not enough information of exactly how they're doing it. But seems to be pretty confident that teaching this task end to end is mostly solved as far as they're concerned, and that they're able to do very complicated applications. I wasn't able to ask him a follow-up on that on what the complicated applications were,
Right.
but it seems like they're confident it's well within the requirements that they have for BMW. And again, my feeling is the requirements, one of them is going to be picking up sheet metal
Right.
and loading the robotic cells with those, which should be fairly straightforward, easy to do, but it's a task that you need to train a little bit. And again, from what we saw with Aloha, it was rather remarkable on what they were able to do with the small number of training sets.
Yeah.
And again, we had been speculating, it's like, man, where are they getting their compute? And in a discussion with Hans and James the other day, James was of the feelings like, yeah, for this kind of stuff, you don't need a large compute like you need for a large language model. It is actually something you can do in a much smaller, the training set doesn't have to be as big, and the kind of compute that you need access to, they would probably be able to have it in-house. And that's sort of what they indicated. It seems like everything is happening in-house. So
Yeah.
for me, it's like, wow,
Yeah.
they're doing it with less than 100 employees. And they clearly must have some very sharp people that have kind of worked in this field to be able to do with AI. And they must have had a couple of breakthroughs in there that they're realizing things work. And in some ways, we've been kind of expecting that, because there's going to be some emergent behavior that people don't expect in the training, especially when you start to go multimodal, that might be the breakthroughs. And again, he talked about not needing sensors.
Yeah.
And that's something that I had sort of felt we didn't need to have sensors like on the fingertips. We didn't need tactile. We talked about that.
Yeah.
That was something that James Dama also was kind of in agreement with me that you didn't need it. And so it was a bit of a shock when Tesla put it in there.
Yeah.
And of course, they put it in there to begin with, and now they're finding out they don't need it. It's almost like when Tesla discovered you don't need radar.
Radar. Yeah.
The sensor fusion problems, and that in many cases is like unnecessary. And the reason it's not necessary is if you have a really good perception system, you don't really rely that much on your tactile senses as you think.
Uh-huh.
The tactile sensors is when your eyes can't see something. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
my hand's out of view. I'm reaching underneath the sink. I'm trying to find that nut. I know it's around here somewhere. And but if you're able to see that, you don't need the tactile. You just need to be able to see what's going on, that everything is right. And it's not that they don't have sensory feedback. They are getting it, because when you go to close the motors, when it hits something, you're going to get a change in the current that will let you know it's there.
Yeah.
So it's a more of I wouldn't even call it a pressure feedback. It's more like you are feeling something in your muscles that's letting you know, okay, I've got something. I know how much I'm applying on it. That's enough information. You don't necessarily need to have the tactile sensors on the tips.
Right.
They may be something that's nice to have, and it may depend upon the application area you're going into. So there may be some that, yes, you really need it, but it might be the majority, especially what they're looking for BMW. It's like not needed.
Yeah.
And it adds costs, it adds mass, power requirements, everything else. So that tells me the perception system must be very good at being able to identify things, along with the fact that you get the feedback, the back EMF coming from your motor drives, as well as knowing what the inputs are of the embodiment. So it seems that when all these pieces start to come together, you may be getting more emergent behavior than people anticipated at first, where things converge a lot faster just because they actually reinforce themselves as opposed to making the problem harder.
So he seemed to suggest that the tasks was not hard. We also got that from the fellows up at Stanford, that 50 times, they could do the task 50 times,
Mhm.
and they could get 98%, 99% perfection from the bot doing it on its own. But the task, and so we could start to maybe think that the general tasking is not that hard. But then Brett was suggesting that the hardest part was actually the environment issue, which we've talked a lot about. So you could have structured, and they talked about the factory not having a lot of issues environmentally because you can control to some extent the temperature. You can control what's around you better than you can in a home or in a nursing home or something like that. But this is where I think you want your 1,000 bots, right? This is where you
Mhm.
1,000 bots moving around in an environment where there are humans and other bots and other equipment and tables and different kinds of floors and things of this nature, because you get your 1,000 bots all with the data coming in. Those 1,000 bots then are uploaded to all the other 1,000 bots, and you can get a lot of data and a lot of learning quickly.
Yes, yes. And again, he's talking about the environment is in the factory is really well structured.
Yep.
So again, environmentally, you don't have to worry about rain. You don't have to worry about strong sunshine. The temperature is kind of consistent. So that makes the demands on the hardware a lot less. So it's easier to kind of build it, as well as operationally what it has to do. And the bots are not going to be running freely around the factory. They're going to just be working in a very small area where the task is very simple and it's very repetitive and it's very structured. It doesn't change that much. So, everybody kind of talked about the coffee maker example. There's like, oh, did they always put the coffee maker in the same location in front of him? It's like, okay, so in the general cases, the coffee maker could be like all over the place to get to find it, but that's not how it works in a factory.
Right.
In a factory, everything is like, where is it supposed to be? And with very little variation. The other thing that he sort of mentioned is like from the walking, or say for the reason they have legs, it wasn't so much that it was needed to be able to walk around the factory. It's just because the environments that you're in, it works better with legs and feet than it does with a wheeled vehicle. And he
Yeah.
talked about sometimes when you need to grab something, you need to put your foot up on the pallet to be able to go everything in there. And that's something that's really hard to do with a wheeled vehicle. That not wanting to change the workspace design. So they're really looking at it not running around the factory, but just having the mobility that you need to do in that enclosed workspace. The only reason people do a lot of walking in a factory is because they need to go from their car to where they need to work, to where they go to the break room, to where they go to lunch, to where they go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
The bot doesn't need to do any of that.
Or to go
So
over and
once it's
talk,
in, it's
or to go over and have a conversation with somebody.
yes. So for the most part, the bot is going to stay in a very localized area with very little movement.
Yep.
Only the movement that's needed to do that little bit of that job. And the other thing that I sort of noticed in their specs is that everyone else was having these on their spec sheets that, 5 miles per hour. So,
Right.
and the thing is, everyone's spec sheets are all BS at this point because they're all aspirational values. They're not there yet. They're building it. That's what they're trying to design to. They haven't got to it. But Figure kept it at 3 miles per hour when everyone else was like 5. And of course, the reason why Tesla is at 5 is because they don't want to go faster than that. It's not that they really want to. It's more of like, we won't go faster than 5.
Right.
You don't need 5 miles per hour to work in the factory.
Not even remotely.
3 is good enough.
Yes.
You
That's
don't need to exceed 3.
a normal walking speed. That's
2 to 3 miles per hour. 3 miles per hour unloaded.
Mhm.
About 2 miles per hour when you actually are carrying something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say that, so again, what that does is if you're not trying to make your bot into a sprinter, your actuator design changes.
Yeah.
Your actuator is way less.
Right.
The power consumption goes down. It's like all those kind of things. And so they look really closely at the weight requirements and everything else they want to have in there and making sure they're not over designing the bot, because that could be a big mistake.
Yeah, so the first year or two, or even 3, probably is in factories and warehouses and things of that nature, where the limited environment is where they'll be working. So again, it just seems to me, I don't know, because I'm not working in these training environments and seeing how fast they're learning or what the limitations are on how they're generating these learning modules, if you will, and getting better and better at various tasks, as well as knowing their environment. But I just don't know that it's going to take another 2 years for Tesla to get to the place where a bot can work in its environment without running into things or hurting something.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident, and the overall feeling is yes, Elon's made the statement that and he was very careful when he made that, because he was asked when is it, and he felt that sometime next year, and that meant 2024.
Right.
We'll see the bots starting to do useful work in the factory.
Right.
So let's just say he really was being very conservative in that. And I get also the impression from looking at some of the things that Milankovitch has posted out as well, that they're moving in that direction also, that we should start to see that. I expect we'll know by summer. At that point, we'll have a pretty good idea that they'll probably show something by then.
Yeah, this is extremely cool, extremely exciting. It's been so fun to be working on this with you and John and everybody else, as we have been trying to figure this out since day one. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about the very little that we knew when we wrote the Elon Musk mission last year, but there is a chapter about the bot, November of 2022, but it was like this much information. And now in just a little over a year, we've come so far, including these competitors, if you will, other people working. Oh yeah, my last question. I almost forgot about this one. This is one that I think people, it won't matter again. I don't really care, but I do think it's something people are getting wrong. I'm not so sure that the cost of getting into this business is going to be as high as people think. Because now that you've got all these bots running around and being videoed, and people like you that can look at it and say, well, there's an actuator, there's a motor, and start to reverse engineer it, even without having one in their hands. But they know something about robotics, and they have some background in it. I'm not sure it's going to cost hundreds of millions or billions for a company to find a way to get into the robot business. What do you think?
I agree. And again, if you look at this example of Figure and what they've been able to do, they raised 70 million in May of 2023. They have a valuation of like 450 million, I think, somewhere around that. That's the ballpark at the time of that. 70 million, 70 employees, Silicon Valley. That's pretty capital efficient.
Pretty efficient.
pretty capital efficient. Now, they're going to need other rounds, obviously, to be able to, especially to scale and stuff like that. But if they've proven that they're capital efficient and they can do it with that much, it's like, wow, you're right. You don't necessarily need that. And I'm actually surprised, because you have so many Silicon Valley startups that have valuations way beyond that.
Yeah.
Way up there, and they're not doing anything. And again, when I think of how much money Meta spent on the metaverse, and with nothing to show, a lot of times you look at that, you always assume, to do anything takes a couple $2 billion.
Yeah, not necessarily
but
true.
But it sort of depends upon whether you're capital efficient.
Right.
And again, if you see that the CEOs are buying $21 million homes in Beverly Hills,
it's a bad
or the most expensive home in the state of Utah, or whether they have a salary, over $200 million. I'm not naming any of those companies, but when you see that, you say they're not being capital efficient. The CEOs are not engaged. So if they're able to accomplish a lot with less than $100 million, hats off. That's incredible.
All right, Scott, listen, I'll let you get to bed. I'm sure that, it's getting late over there, and it's been great having you on today. Great to get this up to date. With the rate we're going, who knows what we might see next week? I mean, it's like we could see stuff on Wednesday, and then 2 weeks from then they're having the all hands meeting. We can see more at the all hands meeting. It's breaking so fast. It's so interesting. And I'm so thankful that you've been along to help me chronicle this, because it's just fascinating to be part of what's taking place even in this outsider place.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for inviting me on, Randy.
You bet. And thank you to all of you out there for watching. And it's been great talking to you.